So the one thing that I want to talk about is we're going to look at some of the challenges of providing care, particularly in this time of pandemic. We'll look at some concepts of healthy caregiving and resilience, and then we'll look at ways that we can support staff within an organization, and also how we can encourage people to really take an active role in their own wellness. You know, sometimes I wake up in the morning, and over the last 20 months when we've been in this pandemic, you just seem to feel really heavy and you're really not sure why. And it's not even that I've been spending time on the front lines right now, but I think that, you know, when we look across the board, so much of the heaviness that we are experiencing is related to grief and loss. And grief and loss on so many levels, because it's not just the loss of life, but the loss of life as the way that we've known it. We can't even go and get our groceries the same way that we used to without wearing a mask or staying 6 feet apart. There were periods of time where we couldn't see our family members. We haven't been able to travel. Our whole life was turned upside down. And so on many, many levels, we've experienced a lot of loss. And that includes the collective grief, the grief that we're feeling nationally and globally from the losses experienced from the changes in our life, but also from the hundreds of thousands and millions of people who have lost their life during this pandemic. We've also experienced worry and anxiety. And, you know, even though that we've had stresses at work, that increases our stress at home. We've lost control. We've been frustrated and angry that, you know, there's more lockdowns and decisions are being made by others. Sometimes we understand them and sometimes we don't. And then it's probably safe to say that everybody is suffering from physical, mental, and emotional fatigue and exhaustion. For the last 20 months, we haven't had a break from this. We haven't had time to regroup. We've got brain fog, we're tired, and we're just tired of being tired. And it just seems relentless, and especially for you in Saskatchewan with the difficult time that you're having right now and the stressful situation in your healthcare system, in particular your intensive care units. It's just one more wave of exhaustion. And you know, whatever normal is going to look like, it still seems so far off. Even though we have vaccines, we have the implications of the fourth wave and the tensions around vaccines, and we're just longing for a break. You know, we wish we could plan a vacation or travel the way we used to. And maybe even though that's opening up a little bit, it's still not the same yet. Then we have the challenges of actually providing care during a pandemic. And I think the most frustrating part is we haven't been able to care for people the way that we were used to, the way that we wish we could. And this causes staff moral distress and adds more suffering and pain to what the staff is going through. Things like visitor restrictions. And, you know, especially when we look at something like long-term care and palliative care, this just goes against the philosophy of what care looks like for us. As people are dying and their family can't join them, and we've had to have the staff become family and be there virtually to hold iPads and say goodbye. It's been very, very stressful and difficult. Using PPE all of the time, that's been a brand new thing for us. Losing that physical contact, not being able to just turn around and give somebody a hug. It's been very difficult. Fear of getting COVID ourselves or bringing it home to our families. And then all the volunteer programs that support you in your healthcare agency, and the volunteers haven't been able to be there. So that adds added stress on the staff. And now just ongoing issues with staffing and vaccination mandates and tensions around that. There just seems to be endless. On top of all of this are just the ongoing challenges and stressors of everyday life. And I think what happens is people, they carry these stressors all the time, but they're not aware of them. They're not front and center, but they add to this heaviness. They add to this feeling like, how come I'm feeling so drained? the personal ongoing challenges that we all face. Just, how am I going to pay the mortgage next month? And what if I don't get enough hours? Our professional stressors and challenges about our schedule, about our staffing, about how we can support the people in our agencies and our organizations, our organizational challenges. And whether you're working in the healthcare system or even whether you're working in the church, we just know that the organizations themselves have their own struggles, the policies and procedures and the ways that things operate that may or may not support what we would like to be doing. And then we have just cultural challenges that we're dealing with. Certainly in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation, the challenge of trying to find this balance with the Indigenous peoples from our country and how they've been treated, and the people of color, and those who are marginalized, and the opioid crisis. Like, there just seem to be so many justice issues and places where people are marginalized. And then globally, yes, we have the pandemic, but we also have global warming and all of the things that happened in Saskatchewan this summer with drought and grasshoppers and heat. And, it just seems to be relentless. And we don't realize that we're carrying all of these things in the back of our mind every day, and we're trying to provide care for others. All of it takes a physical, mental, and emotional toll, as well as the physical. If you're doing shift work, if you're having to drive, if you're at a computer for 8 hours a day, the mental and emotional toll that happens, and the spiritual toll. Sometimes we're just being faced with life's big questions, and it's been difficult not to gather. It's been difficult not to be with our faith communities during this time. The other thing that I want you to think about is the fact that living through this pandemic has been a traumatic experience. And what we know about trauma can maybe help us to understand a little bit about what's happening to us. If we're living through trauma, part of our brains shut down in order for us to survive. And we can't really fully process things that are going on around us until usually after it's over and we're in a safe place. And that hasn't happened yet. We're still in the midst of this, and we have been for 20 months. So it's normal to feel out of touch with our emotions, especially if you've lived through trauma before. When we're in the midst of trauma, I think this last point is really important. Just getting by emotionally and functionally is okay. We really have to lower the expectations on ourselves and on our colleagues, on our residents and their families, because we're all running on empty. None of us have any reserve, and all of us are living through this trauma. And just in speaking quickly about trauma, if you in particular, or someone in your family or one of your colleagues is exhibiting any signs of PTSD, such as nightmares or a deep depression and suicidal thoughts, please seek medical treatment, because PTSD is diagnosable and it's treatable. You don't have to suffer. And we're going to see so much more of this, particularly in our frontline workers, as time goes on, and we have already. So please just look out for each other's backs and not be afraid to talk to somebody if this is happening to you or to a loved one. So if we're going to be in a caring profession, if we're going to be caring about other people, we have to find a balance. That balance between caring for the others and caring for ourselves. So Henry Nouwen, Blake mentioned that I studied the works of Henry Nouwen. And if you don't know who he is, just really quickly, he was a Dutch Catholic priest who we just celebrated 25 years from his death this past September. He died really young of a heart attack. But during his life, he was also a psychologist, and he taught at Yale and Harvard and Notre Dame, and he wrote 40 books. And he was just a beloved author and writer and priest. But he lived the last 10 years of his life at Larch Daybreak, just north of Toronto. And so he was also a caregiver. And so he knew about this from both sides. And he did a lot of writing about care and dignity and compassion and intimacy. And so much of what he has been able to kind of explore in his books have been stuff that have helped me as I've helped others to learn more about taking care of themselves. And one of the things he encourages us to do is let's look at the word care. Because I think right now in our healthcare system and even in our world, we look at care as a commodity. So I'm here to give you mouth care or wound care. It's a functional thing. It's pragmatic. Or I'm here to take care of you because I'm strong and you're weak and you're suffering and I'm not. And yet care is really about presence. And Henry reminds us that the root word is lament. It's an invitation to enter into someone else's pain before we even do anything about it. And that makes us uncomfortable. It's not a really comfortable thing to do, but it's a privilege. It's a privilege for us. And it's the essential part of being human to care for others. Henry also tells us that, care is not an endurance test. And whenever possible, we need to care with others. So making sure we have strong teams, whether that's in the workplace or in your parish, making sure that you're trying not to do it by yourself, and making sure that if you're working with family caregivers, that they understand too, that they cannot do this alone, that we need to help each other out. They need to access the resources that are available to them. Because it's really easy for people to say, oh, I'm fine, I'm doing okay, until they crash and burn. Another thing that Henry explores in his writing is the fact that, there's a mutuality in this relationship, and that suffering is present on both sides of the care relationship. The person who's receiving care, as well as the person who's giving care. And it's important to be able to name those struggles and challenges and to find a safe place to tell our stories. And Henry said there's probably no clearer sign of true compassion than this mutuality of giving and receiving. We need a balance of both, just like we need to breathe in and to breathe out. You can't have one without the other. And I bet for many of you out there who are caregivers, whether you're a caregiver in a professional sense, or whether you take care of your family or your friends, people who are givers aren't really good at receiving. We just, always seem to put ourselves last, and we tend to always find the next thing that needs to be done. And then sometime I'll take care of myself. But if we refuse to receive help, or if we refuse to receive care from others, we can get sick. So receiving care and actually going out and asking for help and being open to this giving and receiving and allowing the receiving to nourish you is a sign of health. There are also many gifts that we receive as being a caregiver. And, it's interesting, if I'm face-to-face at a conference, I'll often say to people, how many people have been changed by the people that you've cared for? And usually everybody puts their hand up. And, I know for myself, after 40 years of being a nurse, and then also being a wife and a mother and a daughter and a friend, I know that what I've learned about patience, what I've learned about unconditional love, what I've learned about courage, that has usually been from the people that I've been privileged to care for. And so it has changed me. It's helped me to become the person that I am. And if we don't sit and reflect on that, if we don't see the gifts in our caregiving, if we don't receive those gifts and let them nourish our weary soul, then we'll miss them. And so this self-reflective practice is important. Because you know what? All of us have our own stuff. And Henry wrote a book on being wounded healers. And, we're all wounded healers. We all carry our own grief. We carry our own anxiety. We carry our own challenges and our own stresses every single day that we go to care for someone else. We can't separate that from who we are. but it also helps us in how we are with folks. We understand suffering because we experience it ourselves. And I want you to realize that no matter how broken you might feel on any day, still going into that person's room and just giving them care and a smile or a touch, you bring a light of hope to them. You bring them healing just by your very presence. And so never underestimate the power of your presence. Even though you feel exhausted, even though you feel like you have nothing to give, you give so much. And I love this quote by Rachel Raymond saying, you know what? Long before we had surgeons and psychologists and internists, we were healing each other. We were there for each other. We weren't referring people to someone else. And that the healing of our present woundedness may lie in just recognizing the capacity we have to heal each other and the enormous blessings in just the strength of a touch or a smile. So even on your worst days, just to know that as a wounded healer, you are bringing the light of hope and healing to others, and that it's probably the gifts that they give back to you that will help you heal and grow yourself. Eugene Dufour and I wrote Embracing the End of Life in 2012, and one of the things we talk about in this book is the fact that maybe we shouldn't be calling ourselves caregivers, but care partners. That caring is a partnership where one person reveals their pain and brokenness and vulnerability to another. And through a relationship of trust, they work towards healing and wholeness. So that doesn't mean that I, as a nurse, I'm going to go into your room and kind of dump all of my struggles and pain on you. I have to be working through that myself. But I bring it with me. And in caring for you, oftentimes there's healing in my own life because I've allowed myself to accept the gifts that you give me. So there's this partnership of caring that happens. So one of the things that I talk about in my new book, Healthy Caregiving, is the fact that no matter what challenges we're facing, and we went through a whole lot of them, that there are probably 3 really important strategies to remember in dealing with the challenges of being a caregiver. Number 1 is support. We're going to talk about each of these. Number 2 is knowledge. Learning more about things like compassion fatigue and burnout and self-care and resilience and how we can mitigate some of the detrimental things that happen to us as a caregiver. And the third one is perspective. Sometimes if we just change our view of a situation, we can bring healing and wholeness and make something positive. So the first one is support. And in our personal and professional circles, we need to have support. Who do you talk to? Who do you vent with? Check in often with yourself, with your colleagues, with your managers, with your pastor. And, we can be creative as we do this. Sometimes we can't do that in person, but, to be able to do it in Zoom. I've been involved in a lot of Zoom support groups over the last 2 years. Or having a check-in at meetings. If you're going to be meeting with a group of staff, to be able to just start the agenda with, let's go around and tell me how you're doing. And sometimes, people will say, oh, I'm doing okay. And sometimes they won't be doing okay. But at least we can wrap ourselves around each other and hold space for each other. Making sure that you're seeking help or counseling if you're struggling, to tell somebody that you trust. And to encourage colleagues who you're worried about not to be afraid to go to them and say, hey, I'm a little bit worried about you. Invest the time you need for this support and make it a priority. We can't fix what's happening. We can't change COVID, but we can be present to each other and we can hold space for each other. Other things that we've learned about working with people dealing with grief and loss, the way we are during the pandemic, is the fact that we really need to acknowledge our feelings and our emotions, to be able to talk about them, to give our emotions motion, so to speak, not to try to hide it or to control it. And, or not to say, geez, I shouldn't be feeling this way, because feelings aren't good or bad. They just are. We have to accept that we're feeling good or not. Sharing our stories, sharing our stresses, that's what helps to process them. And when we look at grief, grief is a lifelong process. We're not going to get over this in one day. And we learn about those stages of grief. Well, maybe, yes, I've been angry and I was in denial, but now I'm in acceptance. But you can go through those stages in an hour and go through all of them in an hour later. Grief is not a linear thing. Grief is something that just churns and churns. So don't put expectations on yourself that this is a once and for all and you're going to be fine. You have to realize that this is normal. Letting go of the things we can't control. We talk about having trust and focusing on what we can control, but being able to rest in the not knowing. There's a lot of things we don't know right now. We have to leave them up to God. Caring for ourselves, being gentle and having manageable expectations. We're going to talk a lot about that. And is this grief or stress? Sometimes it's hard to tell. And you manage both of those very differently. So the Canadian Virtual Hospice has a wonderful module for healthcare providers going through COVID-19. And it's free and you can just do it on your own time. And I've got the link in the resources. But it really helps you to separate out if I'm feeling this way, this is grief or this is stress, because you manage them differently. Rituals can also help. And I think rituals are something that we really long for, especially being Catholics. We're so used to having rituals that mark different times and places. And again, because we haven't been able to gather, that's been really difficult. So rituals provide comfort and safety for us. And sometimes they're connected to words, but often they're not. Sometimes, it's just a song or hearing a piece of music, or we have emotions that can come to the surface. And so encouraging people to have rituals at work, sometimes just to gather and read a poem or a prayer or light a candle to remember some people who have died or to mark a difficult situation. Water is another thing that can be really healing if we use that in rituals. Art therapy, having a favorite blanket or even a prayer shawl to wrap yourself in if you've had a particularly difficult day, and just setting aside just some sacred space and time, even in your own home, or encouraging people to do that. Maybe to have a corner that has maybe a photo of a special person or a candle or a plant, and to go there when you need some safety, to go there when you need to decompress, when you need to pray, when you need to think, when you need to cry. So trying to work those into your personal life as well as into your workplace is important. Knowledge is this next strategy, and learning about things like compassion fatigue, which is when helpers are unable to refuel and regenerate. What happens is they just get down to suffering fatigue in such a way that they can't even care anymore. That's the difference between regular fatigue and compassion fatigue. You just get to that point where you don't even seem to have compassion anymore. And we might have some of these signs and symptoms because, this can be really insidious. Sometimes it takes years for this to happen. And it happens over time. And then all of a sudden, I'm just not sleeping well anymore. And I don't know why. Or I don't care anymore. And I don't know why. And so by trying to make sure that you're doing what you need to refuel and regenerate now will keep you from getting to this point, hopefully. Issues that are related to compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, listening to the stories of other people suffering all day long can cause you suffering. Even though the suffering isn't happening directly to you, you still experience that pain. And that can go together with compassion fatigue. Moral distress is when we're asked to do things that are we fundamentally disagree with, or to which we're morally opposed. And so, you know, maybe we're being asked to discharge somebody home, but we know they don't have the resources that they need. And so it causes us moral distress. And there's a lot of moral distress attached to healthcare during COVID. We could go on and on about that, but there's new research on mindfulness and building moral resilience. And then there's an article in the resources. When we talk about burnout, burnout is really about the physical and emotional exhaustion when you feel really overwhelmed at work, you feel powerless, you just can't do your work anymore. But burnout isn't something that just happens to people who take care of other people. You can suffer burnout if you work at the bank or if you work in a factory. But if you take care of other people for a living, that burnout deepens into compassion fatigue, where again, you get to that point where your whole worldview changes and you can't take care of people anymore because you just don't seem to care and you don't have that compassion that you need. And so burnout can usually be mitigated by changing jobs or changing your role. Whereas compassion fatigue is not that easy. You need really deep psychological help sometimes to come out of diagnosis of compassion fatigue. So we really don't want you to get there. Again, moral distress. There's a good article, Cultivating Moral Resilience. And, you know, Cinda Rushton talks about how we have to be willing to ask the hard questions. Who are we and what do we stand for? And can we live our values with integrity? And sometimes that means walking away from a situation, what she likes to call self-stewardship. We have to know what nourishes and depletes us, and we need to know when we need to remove ourselves and be good stewards with ourselves with integrity. Kind of the flip side of compassion fatigue is something we call compassion satisfaction, where you kind of focus on the pleasure that you derive from doing your work well. There was a reason that you got into the caregiving role that you did. And so often, you know, there's pleasure you bring to others through your work and the way you help your community. So this is kind of fostered by really reflecting on the rewards of your work, you know, really doing some soul searching and why did I get into this in the first place? What keeps me going? What sustains me? How have I made a difference? And is this still the right job for me? And Henry Nouwen did an interview with some alumni from Notre Dame, and he made this list of avoiding burnout, and I love it. He says, basically, burnout is giving without receiving. So if you're not allowing yourself to be cared for or seeking self-care, that's a sure way to move into burnout. That it's important not to be alone in caregiving and realize when it's time out for a change and not feel guilty about it. Trust that when you leave, your presence will continue. That's really important. And that's important too for you to help family caregivers to understand that they don't need to be in that room 24/7 for the person to know that they care about them and they love them. Because we all know, even sitting in this room today, I have lots of people that love and support me, but none of them are in this room today. But I know that they still love and support me. That stays with me, even if they're physically not present. So, you know, and being a good care partner is being present, trying to be mindful of being really totally focused on the person in front of you. Because a difficult thing is to really kind of be there, but not want to be there. And that leads to resentment, and that leads to that downward spiral of burnout. So when we talk about trying to build a capacity for resilience, resilience is something that helps helpers, people who care for others, to stay healthy. And the experts will say that there are really 3 things that are important with building resilience: self-care, improving our self-awareness, and reducing chronic stress. We're going to talk about each of those. I love Parker Palmer. He's another one of my favorite authors, but he says, you know, self-care is not selfish. It's good stewardship of the only gift that I have. And anytime we can listen to our true self and give it the care that it requires, it's not for ourselves, but it's for all of the lives that we touch. So lots of times, when I ask somebody if they're taking care of themselves, they say, well, I don't have time to take care of myself because I'm taking care of everybody else. Especially if you're working full time and you've got aging parents and you've got kids and grandchildren, and there's always something to do. But caring for yourself isn't optional. And it isn't something that you just add on to your to-do list if you have time. It's an intentional way of living, where your values and your attitudes are integrated into your day-to-day routine. You're the only one who knows what nourishes you and what sustains you, what refreshes you. You have to make sure that that gets fit into your day. And you look at this icon of this almost dead battery, we wouldn't let that happen to our phone. So don't let it happen to you. And maybe every time you plug your phone in, you can think, what did I do for myself today? Or what am I going to do for myself tomorrow? Because caring for yourself is an inside job. Nobody can do it for you. You have to be convinced that you have to do it for yourself. And it's a holistic thing. Just like we try to give holistic care to our patients, we have to take care of our body, our mind, and our spirit. So I'm not going to go through all of these lists because we don't have a lot of time, but they're all listed on your handout. Caring for your body, it's not time to start some new big extensive exercise program in the middle of a pandemic when you're exhausted. So just have manageable expectations and maybe just get out for a walk. Move in between meetings or trying to make sure you're getting enough rest. Try to make sure you're just eating healthy, that you're eating 3 times a day, seeing your own doctor. Things that are baby steps, things that you can manage. Caring for your mind is also really, really important. And this first point, I think, has been something that's been driven home to me so many times in my life. As I said, people who are givers, we put more and more and more on our plate, and we never take anything off. And before long, we just can't carry it anymore, and we crash and burn. And so, can you sit down, even with a pen and a paper, and really take stock of what's going on right now? All the things you're responsible for, all the committees that you're on, all the things that you're doing, and prioritize them. Maybe there are some things you can delegate. Maybe there's some things that you really have to let go of. I know for me in my life, there have been a few times that I've had to leave jobs and quit projects that I really love, but it was killing me. I wasn't any good to myself, to my family, my friends, or my coworkers and my clients because I was burning out. The other thing I think that the pandemic has helped us to do is maybe learn how to simplify. We haven't been able to go do the things that we used to be able to do. And I know in my own reflections, I think, it's really changed the way that I spend my time and spend my money. And I don't want to go back to the way that I was before. There's a link for a really good self-care inventory in the resource sheet that you're going to get. And we have to learn the words no and enough. We don't know the word enough. I talk about that a little bit in my book. But it's important for us to be honest with our feelings and emotions, have a safe place to reflect on them, and caring for our spirit, enjoying Sabbath rest. I think we all remember a time when Sunday was different. The stores were closed. We would go visit our family and our friends and our cousins, and every day runs together now. There isn't that time of rest. And we need to build that into our schedule, whether that's a day or an afternoon, whatever it is that you need, whether it's going for a walk, going to the theater, meeting up with your friends, build it into your schedule. Decreasing chronic stress, we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and taking time to reflect on your day. Journaling is helpful, and, having some gratitude. I'm a big believer in self-reflective practice. And whether that's something that happens, and you get up in the morning and it's just 5 minutes earlier before you put on your phone and you've got some quiet time, or at the end of the day, or on the way home from work, or taking an hour and just having a bath or sitting in the front porch. However you work that in, to be able to really take a deep breath and say to yourself, how are you doing? How are you really doing? And how did that conversation go with Mr. Smith today? And, maybe how would it go tomorrow if I wasn't happy with that? Time to reflect on what you've given and also what you received. And lots of times, I bet there's families that will say to you, oh, you're such an angel. Thank you for taking care of my mother. Thank you for taking care of my father. And we smile at them and then we go on our merry way. Take this time during the reflection to listen to those voices again that said, thank you. And let that wash your weary soul. Again, we'll miss those gifts that we were given if we don't take a moment to reflect. Looking at our own grief loss history, making sure we're making time for our own spiritual growth, being aware of our body and how it's responding to stress, and exercising self-compassion. Self-compassion, there's a link in your resources, and it's phenomenal, the work that Kristen Neff is doing in self-compassion. And if you haven't discovered it, I really encourage you to explore it, because, she really hits the nail on the head that we don't treat ourselves as well as we treat our friends. We're really hard on ourselves. And we really need to change those tapes that we're playing over and over in our head. We need to be able to manage our expectations. If you hear yourself say, well, I should be doing this, or I shouldn't be doing that, or I should be feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling that, you're putting those expectations, and you need to have compassion for yourself. You wouldn't say that to your friend. And so self-care can help us to build resilience and be healthy, but it's not going to help us in the moment of chaos. Whereas if we're in a moment of chaos, we can take a deep breath, we can walk in that room, and we can say to ourselves, you can do this. I've been with dying people lots of times before. I know that I can talk down this irate daughter. I can do this. That's what helps us in a moment of chaos. So self-compassion is really important, and practicing mindfulness and taking a deep breath, coming back to the present moment, and being gentle with ourselves. When we talk about mindfulness is very simple. It's being able to focus on the present without judgment. Notice what's happening while it's happening. Not worrying so much about the past or the future. And that's really important in COVID. We can spend a lot of time ruminating about, well, this is the way we used to do things, and why can't we do things like that anymore? Or when are we going to be able to do this again? All we have is right now. We have to make the best that we can of the situation that we're in. And if we can take a deep breath before we go into that room, or make that phone call, or go into that meeting, focus again on the present and being totally present to the person that we're going to see, that makes a huge difference. It helps us to be more attentive to ourselves and to others. So mindfulness is something that, yes, it's fostered in disciplines like yoga and meditation and contemplative practice, but you don't have to go to yoga class to become more mindful. Just being able to take a deep breath, even this savoring, make a cup of tea, just put your hands around the warm cup and smell the lemon, and take a moment to just drink it in. Our mind loves to be given pleasure and not so much to have analyzing and input all the time. And so sometimes for us, just to enjoy a moment, that's like giving our brain a little massage. Do that in between your Zoom meetings or in between your clients, and see how much just a 2-minute brain massage can help you to focus. Our body doesn't need to be stressed all the time and live with high cortisol levels. It wasn't built to live in that kind of hyper sympathetic nervous system stimulation all the time. So exercise, managing our stress, again, being more mindful. Contemplative prayer can help. Learning how to just be. and trying to learn how to decompress. How can you relax? How can you just be with yourself in the moment? The last thing is perspective. You know, sometimes we need to figure out, is this a solvable or an unsolvable worry? Because we worry no matter what. And if it's not solvable, then why are we worrying about it? Keep our expectations, both for ourselves and for other people, realistic, because nobody has any reserve right now. Everybody's running on empty. Be mindful, one day, one decision, focus on the present, and remain hopeful. The future is still fragile, but we're going to survive and hopefully find some new meaning along the way. Sometimes we just have to turn off the news. I know that happens to me. Watch something that's inspiring and uplifting. Sometimes, the emails that come in my inbox every morning from the Henry Nouwen Society usually give me a good way to start my day. We also have to have a balance between looking inward and looking outward. So it's important for us to look inside and say, how are you doing? And try to focus on the things we need to take care of ourselves. But we need to find that balance between caring for ourselves and caring for others still, so that we're not just navel gazing. So again, it's all about balance. Practicing gratitude. And I think we've all learned a lot of lessons during COVID that can help us when we reflect. I think we've been resilient. We can survive and we can thrive. We've learned new ways to do old things, and we've become very versatile. And we've also learned a lot about sacrifice, personal sacrifice, where we've had to stay home and wear masks and not see our loved ones for the greater good. We've learned about the importance of relationships and about living simply and mindfully and slowing down. We've learned about what's essential and who's essential. We've all learned about Zoom. Technology, we had to let go of the fear of technology. And this is a really important one. I think we've learned about the importance of mental wellness and taking away the stigma and being able to talk about this, about PTSD, about the anxiety that we're all feeling during this time. And I hope that that's something that stays. We've learned new ways of caring for each other and supporting local businesses and neighbors. So what are some strategies for staff? I think making sure your staff is committed to caring for themselves, to setting boundaries, to taking their days off, opportunities to debrief and have ongoing conversations at staff meetings or shift change or regular gatherings, whether that's virtual or not. And then making sure that there's time for a formal debriefing after a really difficult situation. Watching out for each other, challenging each other to self-care, affirming each other, avoiding negative talk, enjoying some social time together. Again, sometimes that's virtually, but sometimes, we can slowly get together in small groups, newsletters, social media, finding ways to ritualize things together, to share memories, to celebrate lives. And then organizations, I think, need to really be aware of the challenges in the workplace, making sure there's an availability for support, whether that's through an EAP program or you're giving your staff access to spiritual care and social work, different things that you already have in place. Discussing mental health and wellness often, non-judgmentally, making sure that you have a supportive work environment, making sure that managers, it's an active role and not just a passive role to say, oh, well, my door's always open. But it's different if you go down and you say to your staff, how are you doing? What can I do to help? Making sure you have adequate resources. And I know that's very, very difficult right now, but honestly, it was difficult before the pandemic. And so we just can't keep using that excuse and not giving people a day off. They're burning out. We have to find ways around that. Making sure we're providing some opportunities to support self-care. Perhaps there's some complementary therapies that can happen in the workplace. Ongoing education, a no-blame work culture, and peer support, mentoring, professional development. So just kind of pulling all of that together, I think it's a good reminder to us that this is not self-serving. We're not doing self-care and trying to keep ourselves healthy just for our own means. We need to find this inner peace. We need to find this place of wellness. Because if you alone can find that, thousands around you will be healed. And I think that that's important. People notice if you have that kind of peacefulness in you. And so we have to find it for our own sake and for the sake of our family and loved ones, the people we work with and the people we work for. So there's the different resources that are listed on your handout. Really good websites to go to, the self-care inventory, the article on moral resilience. A lot of the stuff that I took was from the Compassion Fatigue Workbook, which is another good book. And then there's my book, and you can access my books on my website, and that's also, or you can do that through the publisher or through Amazon. So I'm going to turn my slides off now, and we'll just kind of check and see if there's anything that people want to comment on, or if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat.
So we do have a few questions here for you right off the top. Michelle, the first one, Cheryl, who works down at Moose Jaw there, was wondering, you said you mentioned something about a new book. Is that this one that we're giving away, or do you have another?
The Healthy Caregiving is my latest book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing I was going to ask you, and this is just for myself here, I know when I'm talking to managers sometimes, you know, I'll just be chatting with them informally and kind of saying, look, I know the problem that you're talking about here in terms of staffing is like a $10 million problem. I don't have $10 million. What is some small thing we could do? And so around here at St. Paul's, we've done like probably a dozen little things, and we kind of feel like that's all they are. And yet when I'm listening to some of this, it sounds like a lot of self-care is, I mean, I guess you could look at it as a big thing in the sense of a worldview, like it's something that I do for myself. But a lot of the time, self-care is just a lot of these little things. Is that fair to say? I mean, I guess I can't think of a big care thing short of like a vacation or a, you know, taking a few months off, but it doesn't always have to be some momentous thing. It can be a few moments of quiet. It can be, you know, is that fair to say?
And even encouraging that in the workplace. So one of the things we've learned a lot, and of course my background's hospice, and then if you're talking about long-term care, is the fact that after staff have dealt with a death, you need to give them 10 minutes to just kind of, you know, process that, and whether they're allowed to kind of do that together or they have a ritual that they process. But to build into your workplace culture, the fact that it's okay for people to say, hey, you just go for 10 minutes, I've got your back. And that we do that for each other. And I know that, you know, it's an ongoing issue with staffing, but talk to the staff and see what they need and see what would be helpful and work on some of those things together, because everybody just wants to have the best experience. They're there because they care. They care about their colleagues, they care about the residents. And so how can we best support you? What else can we be doing?
Just looking over here, do you recommend one of your books that helps spiritual care support staff more? Which one would you maybe more recommend?
The very first book that I wrote is really about the spirituality of death. And it's all Henry's writings kind of compiled together, looking at dying well and caring well from the perspective of his writing. And there's a lot more in it about spirituality and kind of our relationship with God and being God's beloved, and how the saints are our midwives into eternity. He uses a lot of really wonderful, so if it's particularly about end of life, that's a good one. But I think this last one, the Healthy Caregiving book, I really, again, I use Henry's words, and I tried to put the book together because a lot of the work that I do is for people in secular healthcare. I don't always only do workshops for faith-based organizations. So in trying to kind of temper this book, to not have really a lot of Jesus or Christian language, but to use the elements that Henry writes, because he was also a psychologist. I think he has that bridge there between the language for the sacred and the secular, because he encourages to think about, what does care really mean? What does compassion really mean? And who are we as the human person? And so when we talk about this need to decompress, to be able to learn more about contemplative prayer, to be able to try to fit in some retreat time for yourself, and then foster that in whichever way is comfortable for you and your faith tradition, whether that's Catholic or not. And so I think that, the difficulty has been that we haven't had that support because we haven't been able to gather in our parishes and have meetings and that. And so trying to kind of get back to that as the lockdowns allow us to, but also to find what feeds you. And there are a lot of good writers out there. Joan Rupp has a lot of really good books on with prayers that you can use to help you through suffering, to help you through loss. So I think, again, just trying to, you can sign up in the Henry Nouwen website for a daily email that'll come to your inbox. And it's really inspiring and it's free. And so finding what feeds you and seeking that out.
If you don't mind me, this is another question here. I've often heard that there's self-care, and then there's things that we do to make ourselves feel good in the moment that really aren't super helpful. So the description would be maybe something like, binge watching TV, or buying vintage cameras online, which is something I fell into about a year ago during COVID. And now it's vintage trench coats. But at any rate, how is there a clear distinction between the two? Is there a way to discern, when it's healthy self-care and when it's just like, I don't know, escapism or not healthy?
I think sometimes those things can be both. Sometimes they can be kind of a mindless thing. Like for me, it's jigsaw puzzles. I just need to not be thinking about anything. So I'll start a puzzle. But you use the word discernment. And I think, again, in our Christian Catholic tradition, especially the St. Ignatius, trying to really learn how to spend some time with God and just really discern, how does this make me feel inside? How is the Spirit, is the Spirit giving me the message that this is healthy, or is it hindering my relationship with God and with others? And so again, how can you perhaps use some quiet time to do that? And to take that really hard look at yourself, like I said, where you have to say, look at all the things that are on my plate. They're all good things, but are they serving me and my family and my community and my clients well? Or do I really have to discern that it's time to thin them out? And it's not that they're bad. There's just not a balance there.
I think I've heard many people sort of joke that if like Amazon, Facebook, and eBay got together to design sort of a self-care app, I mean, it would probably solve all our problems, because they know how the algorithms. But at any rate, there's another comment here again from thank you. I've been blessed by your books and speaking. Looking forward to an in-person connection sometime. Sounds like she's inviting me back for our next convention.
Hopefully COVID will be over and we can have a real conference face to face. Blake and I were talking about that.
So she goes on, she says, yes, we need to live in the now. It is so hard not to get caught up in the I wish it was blank again.
And I think, what, our faith teaches us that. And maybe just in closing, the person that teaches us about self-care is Jesus Christ. He's our model. Who else started a new job and went off for 40 days of quiet time before they started their new job? He knew when it was time to go to the desert. He knew when it was time to connect with God. He knew when he needed a break. All the people weren't healed, but he said, it's time to go. And so if we use that as our role model, And we use the stories in the Gospels and that's one thing that Henry Now, and he's got some really good books that unpack the Gospels for us in ways that help us to use them practically. But we really have to remember that we can't do everything. It's like that Oscar Romero's prayer, we are not the Messiah. We are just this, we can only do so much in one day. And that should give us some cause for relief, because we can't do everything, and that's okay, but we can do something. And Jesus wants us to be happy and healthy. We are the beloved. He doesn't want us to live in angst and anxiety. We're being good stewards of our own time and of the compassion that we have. And then we have to let it go, because we can't save the world. And if we try too hard, we can, really do damage to ourselves in the process.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, just as we're wrapping up a little bit of the chat there, I just want to say thank you very much, Michelle, for everything you've offered today. Some of the lines that stood out to me, that caring is not an endurance test. I love that. The recognition that suffering is present on both sides is really important, to recognize that that's legitimate, that we're not just being weak. I love some of the concrete ideas that sometimes people are saying they're afraid of offering some, not solutions, but some ideas. And I think some of these ideas would be great in a huddle in a long-term care home, hospital, whether it's just doing a one-word check-in or some kind of ritual that people can gather in. And that image of the phone, the idea, you wouldn't let this happen to your phone. What you've highlighted through your whole presentation is this idea of the value of self-care, not to minimize it, that it's not selfish, that it's necessary. It's a good, holy, healthy practice. And I think that's something that we probably can't say enough. And the reason that so many of us need to hear it, and so many folks in healthcare still need to hear it, is because there's probably still some resistance to it. As helpers for doctors, nurses, care aides, all the people who work in healthcare, they're helpers. Even in administration, they're helpers. And so at the end of the day, if they feel they haven't helped someone, they feel like they haven't done their job. So this constant reminder, this is a message we need to get out to people for the next 10 years. When we started, shopping and playing hockey on Sundays, we didn't gain a day, we lost a day. And I think that's what this self-care piece is talking about, that idea of almost Sabbath, of giving ourselves these momentary pieces a day to help heal. So thank you very much for all that. There's people asking about your book. So we've got a bunch of winners, and we'll get those out in the mail soon. They were also asking about the resource. So what I will do is, as long as Zoom is being very friendly and helpful, I'll find the emails of all the participants, and we will email out that PDF one way or the other. It will also be on our website, so you can download it there to be able to share with your staff, or even be able to follow up with Michelle or any of the other resources she recommended, which were really great. So
there's also 2 other books I didn't put on the resource list, but the person who did the foreword for my book, my latest book, his name is Wayne Muller. And he's written a couple of really good books. One is on Sabbath, and he taught me a lot about what that means and how to take Sabbath rest. And he wrote another book called A Life of Being, Having, and Doing Enough. So Wayne Muller, M-U-L-L-E-R, his books are great, and they'll really give you that inspiration to step back and know when it's enough. So
he wrote it from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Would he be
yes.
Would he be having drinks on a regular basis with Richard Rohr and John Rollheiser?
I think he knows Richard, yeah. Okay. But actually, Wayne Muller studied under Henry Nouwen at the Divinity School at Yale. And Henry actually spoke as his ordination. So he has a background as an ordained minister, but he's also a psychologist as well. So yeah,
there you go. Thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you to all the participants.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
The interest here. Greatly appreciated, folks. This has been a very good way to wrap up the convention. I want to thank the board and all of the people who helped in putting this together. We had Russ Powell and Jerry Fitzgerald, who were helping with this right back from the time when we were first talking to Cheryl about doing this down in Moose Jaw. So some of you were able to take it in the lovely town of Moose Jaw. The rest of you were all over this wonderful province. So thank you very much. Good seeing you all here, if only virtually. And hopefully next October, we'll be able to chat in person. The CHAS AGM is coming up in November. We'll be seeing more information coming out through your emails and on our website. But other than that, it's Friday afternoon, folks. Give yourself a pat on the back and maybe go buy yourself a coffee and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your weekend. Thank you again, Michelle. Take care, everyone. God bless.
Take care. Bye now.
Bye-bye.